Hello, and welcome to Terraria. So, what is Terraria? Most of you know what Terraria is like, and enjoy playing the game, which I do as well. And now, for those who don't know what Terraria is, well, I highly recommend watching this video for a quick summary of what Terraria is about. So, you decided to look into Terraria. Or you own Terraria and started to get overwhelmed because of not knowing what to do. Or a friend had recommended to you by either telling you to buy the game, or you used your friend's money to let them gift the game to you. So, you download the game and decided to boot it up either with a friend or by yourself. And you'll see this menu. So, when you are creating the game for the very first time, the game will ask you to create your new character. It'll ask for your character name, so let's do that. Let's pop in a name in. Once you've taken about 30 minutes, or maybe an hour, to figure out your character's name, next the game will ask you on a difficulty. Now, the difficulty will only apply to the character, not the world for the moment. So, let's talk about the difficulty for the characters. Journey mode was the most recent addition to the game, where it is basically creative and survival mode mixed together, where you can change the difficulty in the game, enemy spawn rates, and duplicate items. This mode is basically for you to sit back and relax and thrive, but you still do have to commit to some mining and gathering some resources. But once you gather enough materials to duplicate it, that's when you don't have to worry. That's when creative actually starts. Softcore mode. It's basically your standard mode that every player plays on. It's technically the easy mode for your character without having to worry much about dying. You only lose coins on your death, which coins is used to buy things. Medium core is the hard version of Terraria, where you drop all your items on death. It's basically the challenge mode of Terraria, and you'll understand shortly on why. Now, hardcore, I can call this mode basically impossible. Because, well, if your character dies as a hardcore character, your character becomes a ghost, which is basically just spectator mode at that point. And if you try to reload the character by exiting the world as that character, your character will be permanently deleted by exiting the world. Now, to the next part of customizing your character. The game will allow you to have a range of varieties for customizing your characters, but I will say it lacks in the clothing department for your character customization, but that won't matter in the game at all. So, after 2 hours of creating your character, you will now get to create your own world, finally. The game will give you 3 options. This is your world difficulty, which determines how your gameplay is played throughout the game. Classic mode is basically easy mode, meant for new players learning about the world and generally more casual experience. Expert mode is a huge step up from casual mode, where things will become more challenging for experienced players, but the game will reward you more for playing on this mode. Master mode, it's basically the same as expert mode, but things have been tweaked to make it a little bit harder on the player to survive. And then there's Journeys mode. Only Journeys mode characters can play on these worlds, since it's basically a creative world. Because if you try to join a world as a normal character on in Journeys mode, it's basically saying that you're cheating. After selecting that, you can now select a world size. There is a small world size for single player worlds, a medium world size which is recommended for 2 to 4 players, and a large world size which is recommended for more than 4 players. Finally, there are 3 options you'll see. There will be Corruption, Crimson, and Random. Now, these are your world evils. Corruption is a purple place where enemies there are flying, spitting things at you, with worms digging in the ground that will chase you non-stop and won't leave you alone until you're dead. The Corruption also has big holes on the surfaces, which will make traveling up on the surface much more difficult. You would either have to build platforms to go across it, or have enough jump height to jump over it. Now, the Crimson, it's just a red place that gives a bloody look, where enemies are a little bit tougher, but the boss here is incredibly super easy. Once you select one of them, you're basically ready to start the world. You just gotta name it, and your world's ready. Alright, once your world is ready to go, let's get started. Yes, the first world that you made. It's probably gonna look nice, or you're just gonna end up in a hole at spawn. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what should I do first? Well, there's a few things that you should or could do first. You could chop down trees to build houses, explore the land around you, or should I say, you have to go left or right. Or you could just straight away start mining. Well, the choice is up to you on this path, but for my recommendation, you should start building houses. Now, I will say this, you will need to build more than one house. Because you might notice this guy. Yeah, you see this guy right here? This guy's important, because he'll help you figure out how to learn some crafting recipes, and he'll give some hints on what you should do next in the world. Now, there are going to be more people like him. Once you build more houses and meet certain requirements, there will be NPCs that will move into your buildings for you to have and shop around. Now, these are NPCs that I will be talking about will be easy to get. So, there are the merchant. If you build another house for him, and you have to have a collective total of 50 silver coins in your inventory, then he will move in. Then once the merchant moves in, and you have more than 100 health, the nurse will then move in to heal you and your NPCs in your town. The demolition will move in once you have a bomb or grenade in your inventory. And I will say this so you get an early head start. Build an underground house for him. You'll understand why. I would say build it pretty far down deep. Now, the zoologist. Zoologists will spawn in if you killed over 10% of the enemies in the game, which will give you some pretty basic starter weapons. The arms dealer will spawn in if you have a gun and bullets in your inventory. I will say this, build a house for him in the desert or somewhere near the dungeon. The next NPC will also prefer to live in the desert. That is the dye trader. Now the dye trader will spawn in if you have a material that can be changed into a dye. And the angler. If you manage to reach the world's edges, where oceans are at, he will spawn in by sleeping on the water Now, these NPCs are easy to get. They don't require you a whole lot of needs, but this is your bare bones basic start for your NPCs. The angler will help you gain some materials, potions, and some crates, which can then spawn more into ores and more bait and pretty cool equipment. Now, I mentioned a few things. I mentioned a desert and an ocean. There are biomes, obviously, in this game. So if you chose the exploration path of the start, you'll come across certain biomes, like the desert, the snow, and the jungle, and or your world evil. I would say this. Please avoid going into the jungle as much as you can at the very start. This biome is literally death to new and fresh players. So just avoid the jungle as much as you can. I will also include the dungeon. Do not enter the dungeon if you see this guy. At night you have to talk to this guy and something will happen. But that's for later on. I will talk to you about. Because if you try to go into the dungeon, you will die to a guardian that will one-shot you. Once you get past or over the dungeon, or you haven't encountered yet, like I said, you'll end up reaching the ocean. Now, the ocean can be filled with treasure. And like I said, you'll find the chance of finding the angler swimming on the surface of the water. You just gotta talk to him and he'll move in. Once you finish building a few houses to your preferred design, you can start mining. Or, if you already started mining, I would highly recommend looking for this land structure. Like this. This is called a starter cave. It's normally located close to spawn, or it's not located close to spawn, and it's going to be super annoying to find one. If you can't locate one, find the lowest point on your spawn region and start digging down up until you find a cave system. Now, if you found a starter cave, there will be chests located near the surface and inside the cave itself. Now, the game will either give you some really good loot or garbage loot, which I question why the developers added to the game at all. Once you start exploring the underground, you'll notice some enemies will start to spawn here. Like worms, jellyfish, slimes. This layer is the most calmest out of all the layers in the early game. But it doesn't hold the best resources as well. Let's talk about the ore progression in this game. So, for early game, there is a tier list on which ore is better to mine. And it'll go, and it's in this order I will show on the screen. It goes from copper or tin, lead or iron, silver or tungsten, gold or platinum, meteorite if you're playing as a ranged character, demonite or crimsonite, obsidian with hellstone. Now you could skip a lot of these ores because the copper pickaxe that you spawn in with can mine all the way up to gold and platinum, which is basically your best armor that you can get and best stuff you can get. And then it'll go to demonite, then crimsonite, and then obsidian with hellstone. The cavern. The cavern covers about 80% of the world. This is where all your ores will be located, and the farther you go down, the more frequent the ores will spawn. On this layer, you'll find spider caves, granite biomes, mushroom biomes, trap chests, underground houses with treasure in it, and much, much more. Now, for this lair, enemies will be a little bit harder, and they will spawn more frequently, and it's easier to die here, so don't get discouraged. The enemies that spawn here, there are mother slimes, which once killed, they will spawn 3 little baby slimes, skeletons, salamanders, giant worms, beetles, crawdads, tims, nymphs. I will say this, with the most bottom of my heart, you will probably most encounter the most hated creature in existence that you will hate as well in all of the game. Cave bats. Each biome will have their own unique take on the enemies, as well as like the bees in the jungle, which you also hate in the early game. And ice bats. Yeah, as much as I will say this, bats will never leave you alone in this game. As I mentioned before, you'll find some pretty cool treasure while underground from abandoned underground houses. Attempt to grab the loot, because, well, it's pretty good. If you see crystal hearts lying around, dig them up and use them to spawn the nurse, like I said. And also for you to gain more health. You can rack up about 20 hearts or 200 health. As I mentioned before, you will also find some cool loot while underground from abandoned underground houses. Try to attempt to grab the loot from there, because the loot is actually pretty good compared to the other chests that you find. I suggest doing this in about every biome, because each biome has their own unique loot, and it's only exclusive to that biome specifically. Now, let's talk a little bit more about lairs. Alright, once you start seeing this background, it means you're getting closer to literal hell, which houses the best ore in early game. But, sadly, you can't mine it up yet. But, before you leave this place, I would highly recommend exploring a bit to locate a hellstone forge and break some pots while you're at it. The pots down in hell are probably some of the best things you'll get down here in early mode. Once you gathered as much as you needed in the underground, it would probably either be night or day. If it's night, then I would suggest bunkering down for the night, and while you're bunkered down, you can get started on some crafting stations that you'll need to progress through the game. Now there's a list for crafting, which allows progression. So, here's the list. The list goes as, obviously, crafting table, a furnace, a lead or iron anvil, a tinker's workbench, if you already beaten the goblin invasion, we'll talk about that later, and then to a hellstone forge. I have mentioned about a goblin invasion. You might have gotten this to pop up. The pop-up is basically self-explanatory. You have a few minutes before a swarm of goblins will approach the houses or where NPCs are living, or at spawn, because it's generally located around spawn or where your NPCs are living. Once you're finished with the goblin army, it'll probably take a while, you got a bigger problem. You got to get rid of a graveyard biome that you accidentally spawned in. After you got rid of the graveyard biome, this guy was spawning in the caverns. Find him. You gotta talk to him twice. The first conversation is just him thanking him, and the second time is when you can access his shop. This is where you can buy the Tinker's Workbench. And while you're at it, buy the Rocket Boots. They are the best mobility for early mode, and will have some very valuable upgrades for later on. I've been talking about gear and mobility and everything, all that. That is a whole category that we're about to talk into. So, they are called accessories. Your friend might have mentioned it to you while if you're playing with him, or you just found it in a chest and you have no idea what to do with it, and you just probably put it in your inventory. So, where do you put them? Well, it's in this little section right here. This is where you put your accessories to apply the effects onto you. And this little section is for vanity slots, which basically is just your pizzazz, your looks. But for me, I would suggest use your vanity slots as your second equipment layout, because it would be easier for you to swap when you're doing things on the fly. This also has the same effect for armor. One side is for armor for the effects, and the other side is for vanity looks. Now you may be asking, well, where can I find the best accessory for me to start off with? Well, my answer to that is the underground, and they're in different biomes. And some of the better ones are dropped by bosses, which I'll get to shortly, and some of the other ones are located in the jungle for mobility, magic, and range. But, like I mentioned earlier, the jungle is kind of hard to traverse. So, that's why normally the best loot is in the jungle, but it's not always the best loot. There's also the snow biome, which provides some really good ranged items, and melee items too. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, there's floating islands up in the sky, which have some really good accessories. But it all boils down on how you want to play the game, with classes. Now let's talk a short bit about classes, because talking about one could take an entire episode's worth. So I am going to shorten it down to the bare minimum. So, melee is the tank. This guy tends to take most of the hits for his team, for the others to stay alive, and should have probably the most defense on the team out of everybody. The ranger. This guy can use guns and bows. This guy provides a moderate amount of damage. The things he shoots can be very useful. Magic or mage. Has the lowest defense, but has the highest damage. This person is probably the most important person, besides the ranger. Our mage guy can provide debuffs on certain enemies while hitting them with certain magic items. So, protect this person as much as you can. Now, last one, Summoner. Summoner has the second lowest defenses and the third lowest DPS in the game. But to overcome these disadvantages, his main goal is to dodge and survive as long as he can. Keeping this man alive can mean the fight can keep going, or the fight cannot keep going. So protect him as much as you can. Alright, so now you picked a class, gathered some armor, maybe got some cool weapons, and some awesome accessories, probably a grappling hook. You can make it out of gems, by the way. Now, let's upgrade their statuses. So, let's talk about this goblin boy. Select the Reforge button, and put an item in the empty slot, and click on his little hammer. Now, there's a huge section for Reforges. Most of them are bad, some of them are good. Weapon Reforges depend on the weapons. Like for example, ranged weapons will have different reforges compared to melee weapons, and melee weapons will have different reforges between magic and so on and so forth. Now, the list for the valueness is in this form from lowest to highest. Alright. Now, for this section is for accessories. This is a list from the weakest to strongest for accessories. Now that you know all the reforges, or you've taken a look over on which is the best reforges, let's get started on reforging. This man right here is probably the richest goblin in the universe because of how much this man steals money from you. So, as I was saying before, once you get your reforges done, let's talk about your arenas. Arenas is where most of your action will be located when fighting bosses in the game. So you must be asking, how should my arena be made? Well, a lot of people have suggestions on how you should make an arena. But the one that I've seen universally is use about 600 wooden platforms, 300 left and 300 right. It's up to personal preferences. Have 3 layers of them, range them about to 8 to 12 blocks high, preferably within grapple height. Campfires and heart lanterns, which can boost your health regen speeds. Mana lanterns, which can boost your mana regen. Torches to light up the place so you can see where you're landing. And a few blocks to place your lanterns on. I will say this, you will have to build a few more later on. One right over here. One here. Another one here. One way over here. But, you know, it's all up to preferences. And I would say this, you have to build one super massive one in the hell with one layer. About this big. Once you get some of them built in the biomes, let's talk about bosses. Now, bosses are what helps you progress through the game as of quote, advances the game's system. Like spawning new ores, granting new items, higher tier loot, etc. Now, these bosses can be summoned, or they could just spawn naturally during nightfall. Let's talk about some of the bosses. Some of the bosses are really easy than others. I mean, like, really easy than others. But, no worries. Once you get the optimal gear, you can easily defeat the bosses. So, how many bosses are there? Well, there's a total of 7 early mode bosses that can be summoned in this list of order. And this is how you summon them. Right next. During expert or master mode, there is a huge difference for bosses. They can go into different phases. And only some of them actually can go into different phases. For example, is King Slime. He cannot go into a different phase. So, the ones that can go into different phases are the Eye, the Brain, and Skeletron. The Eye, when he goes into second phase, he will charge you. The Brain will cause illusions and attempt to charge towards you. For Skeletron, if one of the hands are destroyed, he will begin to shoot skulls towards you. Let's talk about your best chances for defeating these bosses. For the Eye, you want to at least build 2 platforms for you to jump on and go back and forth from. Because in the first phase, the Eye will just follow you around. Then once he goes into his second phase, he'll stand still until it moves again. Just make sure once you hit the end of the platform, whenever he's dashing, make sure it's at the end of his charge, so you can easily turn around without getting hit. For the brain, once you destroy all of its little eyeballs, the boss will get enraged and attempt to ram you once it gets lower. And then it'll start creating its illusions. But the boss itself is weak against knockback. So, get an item that can deal knockback at a rapid rate. Note, you really don't have to defeat this boss. You just need to kill most of the eyes for the items, the tissues. And then once you get enough tissues, you can then just kill the Eye of Cthulhu a bunch of times. Eater of Worlds does not have a second phase, so that's a win. But the segments can be broken and create more of itself. So since the Eater of Worlds is a worm, and most worms cannot go super high up without something to grab onto, so I would suggest making a platform about 200 blocks wide, or platforms wide, and maybe about 15 to 25 blocks high for the platforms to be. Just make sure the worm cannot grab onto the platform. It's also the same for the brain. You don't have to fully kill the boss. You could just kill enough of it for you to get the better loot. Just kill enough segments. Or if you feel lucky enough and want to, you could kill the worm. Next boss is Queen Bee. Queen Bee is relatively an easy boss once you get fully geared. But the only thing I can complain about is its poison. And the amount of little bees that she spawns in when she's idle, because it can literally be annoying because of how much she knockbacks you. Okay, relax. Her first attack is a charge when she spawns in. She usually attempts to line up onto you and takes a shot. To avoid this attack is to simply trick her into charging you while moving up or down by jumping onto platforms. Note, I will say this, the lower she gets, she tends to charge faster and faster. When this happens, use your Shield of Cthulhu to avoid it. It's better by dodging left and right while going up and down. It makes this fight easier. Skeleton can only be spawned by the old man walking around the dungeon. So let's build a platform on the dungeon itself. So I recommend about 2 to 3 layers of platforms, about 400 platforms needed for each layer, and campfires are necessary for this fight to help boost regen speed. Now, since we got all this done, make sure you own rocket boots and combine them with Hermes boots to allow flight and speed for this fight. Now, let's summon him in. Now, once you summon him in, run towards your platforms immediately and make sure you try to stay on the lowest or middle level. If you were to try to stay on the top level, you will have a harder time trying to get him off your trail. What are Skeleton's attacks? Well, the first phase of his attacks are just him smacking his hands around you, which can cause a bleed debuff, which slowly loses life and stops you from regenerating health. To avoid this attack, you must be able to predict where the hands will strike. Note, you can tell where Skeletron is about to swing at you by his arms. Now, his arms will normally move farther out. That's when it's a signal that he will attack. Or he will be moving faster than normal. When you see this, either dodge with the shield or jump over it. I can say jump over it because once Skeleton starts to swing, the only way for him to change the hand's direction is to either move his entire body or the other hand comes swinging from the other direction to attack you. Now, the next attack is his charge towards you. When his head starts spinning, it indicates that he is charging towards you. Avoid this attack. You either must move around in circles or in an oval. It's the best way to avoid his attack altogether. Here is a really good tip for new players. You must destroy the hands, because if you don't, Skeletron will always have 60 defense. Because each hand gives him 25 defenses, so with both hands, it'll give him 50 defense and his natural 10 defense. So, target the hands first. Now, you defeated Skeletron! Congratulations! You can now explore the dungeon. This is where you can find some great loot for you to use, like a pistol, a shadow key, the mermaz, etc. But note you'll need to find a danger sighting potion to see all the traps in the dungeon, because there's quite a few of them in there, so I recommend getting some first before exploring. Now, you're at the end of early game, or as everyone calls it, pre-hard mode. This is where you fight the final boss of pre-hard mode, the Wall of Flesh. So, let's talk about his arena. This will be your longest and most annoying arena you will have to make, because the arena has to be located in hell. Now, your supplies for building it, I suggest getting some bombs. Like a lot of bombs. Maybe even some dynamite. And turn them into sticky bombs or sticky dynamite to help you build this long arena. Now, you'll need about 2,000 to 2,500 wooden platforms for this fight. And you only need one layer. That's it, one layer. That's all you need. And I can say this because the boss will only move in one horizontal direction towards you. Now, campfires are a must-have, and heart lanterns are highly suggested for this fight. Now, while building this arena, use calm potions while building the arena, because if you don't, you'll end up being like this almost all the time. Okay, so you got your arena done. Now maybe during that time you saw this guy. Kill him and grab his voodoo doll. And this is the important part. Do not let the doll touch the lava. If it does, it will spawn the boss in a place that you will not like. Once you got your basics ready, let's fight the boss. Now, let's talk about the attacks. The Wall of Flesh will summon a bunch of these guys. They're called the Hungries, which will have two parts to them. One of them is attached to the wall, and the other part is when they come off of it. The wall can also summon leeches depending on how many Hungries are still attached to its wall. For the boss, the main attack is lasers. It shoots it out of its eyes, which can rack up on damage if you're consistently hit by it. If you attempt to get behind the wall, it will simply just drag you to the front of it while you are losing about half of your health. Now, how can you kill the boss quickly? Well, here's the suggestion on how to kill it quickly. Get high mobility items, or items that allow you to move faster than it. Because once the wall gets lower on health, it begins to move faster and faster and faster. It could speed up to 50 miles per hour, or from a European people, 80 kilometers per hour. Target the eye. The eye has the lowest defense. The best weapon that you could use, best weapon of suggestion, is anything that can penetrate through the walls of Hungries. Like the Star Cannon, Jester Arrows, even grenades is even the better because of the amount of massive damage it can do to just the Hungries. So getting these weapons... No! These weapons suck! Use the bee grenades, but that's just... No! Only bee grenades! And you will like it! But that just sucks the fun out of it. Fine. Okay. I suggest using bee grenades. It's since of the high damage and the high attack, which boosts the damage of the bee nades and the speed of the bee nades by 8%. Which, afterwards, it will tank your computer or any console that you're on. If it does that, that means it's working. But if you're going to use this method, you would have to replace the wooden platforms with blocks, because bee nades cannot go in water or lava. It will just instantly kill the bees. Also, the platforms cannot, and I mean will not, support the bee nades, because it will go through it. So, you beat him in pre-hard mode. Congratulations! Now the world just got a lot harder, and with even more loot spawned now for you to explore and gather, and even get better loot to use. But I'll keep my hard mode separate from pre-hard mode. So by the time you're watching this video, I'm probably working on the hard mode video. Besides all of this, I hope you had fun watching the video. And I hope this video helped out some new players on how to understand on how to play the game a little bit more better. Because I notice, and I've been hearing a little bit on how new players get discouraged or because of how hard it is or not knowing what to do. So I hope this guide helps out to them. Besides that, I will see you guys next time. Later!